back to my channel. It's Lipsy and we're back with another day of 31 Days of October. So today's video is going to be a little story time. Now this is a post that I found on Reddit and I just couldn't help myself, I had to read it out. It's all situated up in the BRECON Beacons and it tells the story of how a young boy and his friends discovered the unseeable. So this is posted by Bappo the Mighty. I'm gonna link the link in the link below. I'm gonna link the URL in the bio below. So go and check out his story if you want to read it yourself and let him know what you think. I mean, go comment on his post. So like I said, this isn't my story at all, guys, but we're gonna dive in and I'm gonna read to you the Reddit post entitled Creepy Tree Carvings in BRECON Beacons National Park, Wales. The following is a true experience and happened to me over 5 months ago as of writing this. I'm still in debate what to think about the whole thing, so here goes. So I'm a teenager and I was on camp in Wales with my school. We were camping in a part of the BRECON Beacons National Park, which is full of pine trees and huge mountains. We arrived at a 3-hour coach drive where I sat next to one of the girls whose name isn't important as of now. Once we arrived, our first activity was putting up our tents. Luckily for my friends, I go camping all the time, so we put up the tent in about 15 minutes, much faster than the rest of the groups. We waited and talked about how surrounding the campsite was a train track which is in use, and miles of forest, surrounding a huge reservoir that supposedly had the remains of an old village at the bottom. Once we had finished putting up our tents, we crossed the road opposite the campsite and walked into a steep part of the pine forest. The trees were moderately thick with thin branches trailing upwards. This is kind of important for later. We started with some team building exercises, like holding a rope so one of us could walk on it, etc. A deeply cut pentagonal shape carved into one of the bigger pines. This seems like it had been recently carved and had been part of a previous activity, but we ignored this and we continued to play the rest of the games that were set. It actually says, I'll skip the rest of the story until the parts that are important. So one of the evenings, me and my friends went back down to the forest by the reservoir to explore a little, since we didn't have any activity set at the time. When we arrived at the forest, we talked and took some photos since the sun was setting and the light was great. When we were reviewing the photos, we noticed another carving into one of the trees. This one was shaped like a cross, but had more patterns on it that I struggle to describe. The carving was about 1 inch deep and wasn't just carved with a knife. Tree sap was spilling out of it still, so it wasn't that old. We decided it was kind of strange and searched for more of them on the trees. When we regrouped, we had come back with photos of at least 7 more. Some were large, some were quite small, but nonetheless they were definitely creepy. They looked like the sort of thing a cult would do, or a sort of ritual. We were freaked out, so we took some clearer photos and walked back to camp. Fast forward to 2 days later, and we pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. We had a canoeing activity on the reservoir, and to get to the reservoir we had to go down to the forest. It's not like we were alone or anything, since we were with the adults and everyone else. So we decided to check again, just to be clear that we hadn't missed any of them, since it was dark out, and sure enough, there were more. However, the ones that we just found were, by the looks of it, brand new. Sap was just starting to come out of the cuts from the inside, and the tree was still freshly green. Freaked out, we took photos and wandered back to the group as if we never left. After the day of canoeing, which was slightly brutal since we had to do activities whilst canoeing, we headed back to the camp to dry off and shower, etc. After I showered, I walked back up to a tent, which was right at the end of the long campsite. My friend, the girl who sat next to me on the coach, Lily, she joined me on the way since she had nothing else to do. I told her about the carving in the photos and she told me that she was sitting with a bunch of others and they saw at least 3 people wandering around the bank next to the campsite, which was divided by a fence and a train track. The bank is private land and belonged to the owners of the campsite. The 3 people she presumed were male and they were dressed in black everything. She saw them and walked back to the group of people that she was sat with. When they all walked back to see the men, they were gone. That, you might think, should be the end of the story, but I can assure you it isn't. One night at around 11 PM, me and 2 of my friends who were sharing a tent with me were walking through the field towards our tent. At the end, we were passing the train tracks that run alongside the narrow field. A moment later, I heard something that resembled rocks falling down the bank onto the train tracks. We looked up to see nothing apart from trees tightly linked together. We looked at each other and then we heard more sounds. There were sounds of trees rustling and rocks tumbling down the bank. The sounds didn't sound intentional, as if by accident. But when the rocks came rushing down the grass bank, colliding with the rocks on the train tracks at full force, we knew they were no longer accidental. All three of us practically sprinted along the field back to the dining hall where everyone was talking, playing cards on their phones, etc. When we burst through the door, we told the camp leaders and anyone else that was listening openly about everything. And the leaders followed us outside to where we heard the noises. In fact, everyone came outside, which resulted in a mess of flashlights beaming into the darkness. One of the team leaders, Sam, told us to turn our flashlights off, except for the leaders' flashlights, and me and my friend's flashlights, so we could show where we saw the rocks. Eventually, we heard rustling up on the bank as if something was brushing through the trees. I shone my flashlight accordingly to where the sounds were coming from, and I really wish I hadn't. The white beam illuminated a black humanoid figure. It looked so impossibly tall, at least 7 foot tall, that I struggled to identify it. I stood frozen to the spot where the figure illuminated in my beam. However, it was facing away from me. Its head pointed in the direction of the other kids. In fact, it was staring just to the edge of the crowd, where my best friend Lily stood, completely oblivious to the figure. It would be an understatement to say that my heart leapt into my throat. The figure moved. It took a step forward, down the bank, then another. After this, everything happened in the heat of the moment, and it was all the blur of flashlights and shouting. I sprinted towards Lily, telling her to get back into the main building as fast as she could. Luckily, the leaders had seen the man when I did, and they shouted at the man to leave and that they were calling the police. The figure, now lit up by several beams of light, revealed an immensely tall, pale man, looking about 35 years old. He turned, he sprinted back up the bank and through the trees to whatever lay on the other side, mainly hills. I ran back to the dining room to find Lily sitting down. She looked so visibly shaken up, and in truth, so was I. I sat and calmed her down, and after about half an hour she was okay. The rest of the camp was okay, but I could see that the incident had hurt the atmosphere. To this day, I still wonder what had happened. I still wonder what the man wanted with her, and what would happen if I didn't intervene. A 7 foot tall, dark humanoid figure. It makes me think of Slender Man. I honestly don't know what this guy saw, and I'm so glad it wasn't me. I don't know, guys, what do you think? What do you think that he saw? Do you think it was a human, or do you think it was something else? What did the thing want with Lily? Why did it want Lily more than anyone, seeing as she was off to the side and on her own, and that thing was looking at her? Imagine how she felt. It makes me feel yucky. So what do you think about this, guys? Let me know in the comments what you think. Has anything similar happened to you? Have you ever experienced seeing something that you just can't explain? Leave a thumbs up, but if you haven't yet, guys, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so I can let you know every time I upload, and as always, guys, never let anyone dull your sparkle.
It's not for me to say